Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Commons. Tonight we have a special guest, Mr. Stephen Jaffe, who's running for Congress in California in District 12, which consists mainly of San Francisco. What's fascinating about this race, which is happening in the primary for the Democratic Party, and the primary election is in June of 2018, is that Mr. Jaffe, is taking on the most powerful woman in Congress, if not one of the most powerful people in Congress. Mr. Jaffe has been practicing law, employment law, in San Francisco for 47 years, and he's received numerous awards. He is a grandfather with 3 children and 2 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to meet Mr. Stephen Jaffe. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Hello, Myrna.
So, welcome to the race. Now, this is the first time you're running for office, yes?
Yes, it is. I'm a political novice.
Okay. Now, tell us about yourself. You're practicing law and employment law, and you've been a plaintiff lawyer, and so in that particular sense, given the nature of our economic problem today, the fact that a lot of employees have to put up with a lot of excruciating conditions to keep their jobs, right? So, could that be one of the impetus for you running for office to make things better?
Well, doing employment law, I represent employees only. I have never represented employers. I'm just not emotionally and personally wired to do that kind of thing. And representing people who have been discriminated against on account of their membership in a protected class. And I
Meaning?
think almost everybody knows the list of protected classes: race, age, gender, nationality, religion,
Right.
sexual orientation,
Yes.
disability, pregnancy, and so on. I come to see the problems that people have that are really reflections of what's going on in the larger community.
Exactly.
So that's one of the impetuses that gave me the wish to run for office. The other things that motivated me were about 3 or 4 years ago, I began to become involved in local politics to some degree. I am now the president of the South Beach District 6 Democratic Club.
Right.
And
Which is what area?
that's District 6, Supervisor District 6 here in San Francisco. It's near the baseball stadium is the best way to describe it.
Yes. South of Market area.
South of
right?
Market, and also includes, I think, most of the Tenderloin.
Right.
So it's got a real diverse makeup.
Right.
I got involved in 2 previous local political campaigns. One was for Jane Kim when she challenged Scott Wiener, and the other one was for a friend of mine, Victor Wang, who successfully ran a campaign for Superior Court judge. Then I got really caught up in working for Bernie.
Yes, we were in the legal committee, right?
That's right.
What committee was that? That's the anti-fraud
Yes,
committee.
Exactly. And Bernie really resonated with me, more so than any other presidential candidate has in my memory. So I really went to work for him. I gave him money. And then I was recruited by the national campaign, and I went to Nevada, and I helped legally supervise the Nevada caucuses, which were incredibly chaotic.
Oh, my God.
And I saw a lot of things, Myrna, with my own eyes about how Bernie was being, there's no other word to put it, cheated out of votes and nominations that later the DNC
there's this big
denied.
Case.
Yes.
Jared Beck and Elizabeth Lee Beck.
Yes.
And I interviewed Elizabeth Lee Beck in the show. It's a fascinating case. They have a very, very strong case.
Yes.
That's why they're getting death threats now, right?
Yes, that is correct. And I applaud Mr. Beck and the Becks strongly for doing what they're doing, and I offer my help.
Exactly.
I have a lot of legal experience, and if they want some free advice, which they say is worth what you pay for it, but I certainly would be willing to help out that cause.
Okay, let's talk about your race. You have basically a year, right? July and then June is the primary election.
Yes, almost exactly 1 year will be the California primary. California has a top 2 rule, which means the top 2 finishers in the primary, regardless of party, regardless of party, face off against each other in November. My goal, obviously, is to get as high as I can in the primary. I mean, I would hope to be first, but if I finish second to Ms. Pelosi, then she will have to face me alone in the November election, and the other candidates will drop off. And hopefully their votes will be, their voters will be more inclined to vote for me than they were for Ms. Pelosi.
Okay, let's talk about, you know, Nancy Pelosi is almost like an institution in San Francisco and in the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, just most recently, even when Hillary Clinton is bashing the DNC for her laws, she was talking about, luckily, that there is a leadership in the Democratic Party who's strong in the persona of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. So it's really courageous for somebody like you to be taking on one of the most powerful political figures in American history. So let's talk about that.
All right. You know, Myrna, I don't think of myself as courageous. I don't. That's not for me to say. But what led me to run were 3 things. One, I was, as I've already said, strongly inspired by Bernie. Secondly, I got, I guess the only word is angry at the way the nomination was stolen from him, because I believe had things been run with more integrity and honesty, that Bernie would have been nominated. And we can talk about superdelegates a little later if you'd like. And then when I woke up November 9th and I see that Donald Trump is going to be president, that kind of was the tipping point for me, pushed me over the edge, took me a couple of months to decide that I was going to run. Now, when you talk about Nancy Pelosi, she's been there 30 years. She, I think, is a lot more vulnerable than a lot of people think she is. And the reason for that is, as you say, she's a huge figure in the Democratic Party. Very big. Probably the biggest right now. But she is not elected by the Democratic Party, and she is not elected in a national election. Her constituency and the people who elect her are right here in San Francisco. They are the only people who elect her. And from what I have been able to see, talking to lots and lots of people in San Francisco for the last 3 or 4 years, Ms. Pelosi is very much disconnected and out of touch with her voters and her constituents here in San Francisco. Her ideas about many issues are not the same ideas that the people of San Francisco have for themselves, their values, hopes, and wishes. I can give you a couple examples.
Sure. Do you think this is related to our country? A lot of people, if you look at the polls, how dissatisfied the American people are with the establishment. Do you think that this is a part of this clamor of people, of the American people, for change and a leadership change?
Yes, I do. I think that Bernie Sanders' rise in 2015 and 16 and the result of the election has created a very strong wave of progressive thinking in the United States, and certainly in San Francisco. And I think that the establishment politicians, and Nancy Pelosi is the establishment politician, really underestimate what's going on in San Francisco. And I think there's going to be a big surprise when that occurs.
If you get elected, what would it be? What would you be as Congressman Stephen Jaffe as opposed to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi? What should be what should people be looking at?
Well, for one thing, I don't aspire to be a national figure. I aspire to represent the people of San Francisco and reflect their views and wishes in the Congress. So that's a very big difference. Her definition of herself, I'm sure, is mostly as the minority leader and a national Democratic figure. Secondly, I differ from Nancy Pelosi on a great many issues. The one that usually comes to mind first is health care.
Right.
Nancy Pelosi opposes single-payer health care.
Medicare for all, right?
Yes, let me say that again. Yeah. Nancy Pelosi opposes single-payer health care. She tries to act like she doesn't. If she is asked the question, and I heard her speak earlier this week at the Commonwealth Club, she'll give you a long speech and talk about how she was carrying signs for single-payer in the 1970s with baby strollers, but that was the 1970s. We're in 2017.
Right.
She may have been for it, I don't know, in the 1970s. She is not for it now. She claims that it is too expensive, and she is for repairing Obamacare, which has already been repealed.
Right.
And if people would...
Which has its own problems anyways.
Of course. And if people would like to know why Ms. Pelosi is opposed to single-payer health care, they don't need to look any further than her list of donors.
Right.
She gets a lot of money from the healthcare industry, for the for-profit healthcare industry, from the insurance industry, and from Big Pharma. And that gives her a stake in preserving the status quo and avoiding single-payer healthcare.
Right. I grew up here in San Francisco, and I have seen the change in San Francisco, and it's not for the better. And I feel sorry for this new generation of kids who are struggling really hard just to, and they end up with these huge student loans. And after they graduate, there's no jobs waiting for them. They have to compete with lower level jobs, right? So in San Francisco, employment is a big thing. And then walking down the street, it's really distressing to see homeless people. And then you have all this, very expensive homes, but the ordinary person who works so hard and have a job cannot afford them. So you have 2 to 3 generations living in one house, okay? And I think like Bernie Sanders have talked about this income inequality, and I believe San Francisco is like that, to a large extent, and families are forced out of San Francisco because they can't afford it. So could you address specifically, as a representative of San Francisco, when you go to Congress, how would you address that we need a decent, fair, and equitable tax reform? So predatory.
Yes, no, I agree. Tax reform is very important, and what President Trump, which is hard for me to say, proposes is exactly in the opposite direction that the tax reform needs to go. I'm not a young person, and I remember growing up, and the most prosperous times the U.S. has ever experienced were the 50s and early 60s.
Right.
And do you know that during the 50s and early 60s, the top tax bracket was in the 80 or 90%? In other words, the more you earned, the more you paid.
Right.
And those were the days when the U.S. was the most flourishing and prosperous. We need to restructure our taxes so that the people who earn more pay more.
It's got to be a bit progressive.
Yes. The other thing is the compensation of CEOs of corporations, the only word I can think of it is obscene.
Right.
It is obscene for a CEO to earn hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars as in a paycheck, and for the workers who are keeping him there and supporting him to earn less than a few percent of what the same CEO in the same company is making. Exactly. I find that obscene. It's unequal. It's got to be fixed.
Exactly. Now, how about would you have any thoughts? Would you have any thoughts on how to mitigate the housing situation in San Francisco, where it's been astronomical? You see, I have a theory regarding what happened to San Francisco with this housing market. in 2008, remember the second Great Recession, but I call it the Great Depression,
Yes.
where a lot of homeowners lost their homes, foreclosure. Basically, it's a big transfer. It's the biggest transfer of wealth from the middle class to Wall Street. And basically what happened is with the housing is as people got foreclosed on, as people lost their jobs, a lot of investors, a group of investors scoop up a lot of these houses, a lot of these properties, and now those same owners have been raising the rents astronomically. So what they have created is a huge landlord-tenant class in San Francisco, worse than ever, because suddenly people who own their homes suddenly have to rent.
Well, I think you're 100% correct, but there's another facet, an aspect to what you're talking about. San Francisco has also, or San Francisco government has been infected with undue influence by real estate developers and banks and construction companies. And there has been an explosion of construction of luxury high-rise condos and apartments in the city. We were fortunate to get the moratorium on Mission Street put in. We need a citywide moratorium on that kind of construction. We need to slow things down. The city is incredibly burdened right now with where are we going to put all these people? Where are they going to park cars? Where the infrastructure is crumbling. The Muni and BART are pretty much at capacity. The traffic is absolutely impossible, and I could talk to you about traffic all day.
Right, yeah.
And we've got to stop this uncontrolled, unplanned construction because it's solely for the benefit of real estate developers, banks, and...
Thoughts about the student loans. It's trillions of dollars. And, you know, with some of this, and what's happening is, with the Federal Reserve, they loan the banks the prime rate of almost negative zero, right? Whereas the students who've graduated, they're being charged from 7 to 10%.
Yes, no,
you know, so but the federal government has not addressed that. As a matter of fact, the Department of Education, I believe, is hiring all these collection agencies to go after the students who are struggling to find jobs. So our federal government has not been responsive at all to the needs of the people who are desperately needing some assistance. As a congressperson, how would you handle that situation?
Well, first thing I would do is try to find the devices that are there in place to lower the interest rate charged on the student loans.
You know, Tim Canova has got some ideas about that.
Yes. I think perhaps if there's something to which it could be indexed so that the interest rate is indexed to what the bank is paying for the same money and put a pad or spread of the difference, right, so they don't have to make profits off student loans, you know, right, and I mean high profits. Mm-hmm. That would be one way. One issue that's come up is students who find themselves in an impossible financial situation. If they file a bankruptcy petition, student
right,
loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Right.
That should be looked at
right,
to see under what circumstances a student loan can discharge a bankruptcy. Nobody files a bankruptcy recklessly or impulsively. It has horrible consequences for 10 years after you do it. So I think if somebody is serious enough, in serious enough financial situation to have to consider a bankruptcy, that the student loan should be perhaps part of that. I need to look at that.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about your campaign. Obviously, I've seen a lot of coverage in your campaign for somebody who has not run before. You've been interviewed with Fox News. You've had a lot of interviews, so people are really paying attention to you. There has been some people who have run against Nancy Pelosi in the past, you know, but they struggled, and you know it's hard taking on, you know, somebody like Nancy Pelosi. But you had been getting a lot of publicity and high profile of that. So how is your campaign doing? how are you raising money? What kind of endorsements you're getting? So yeah, would love to know. And how can people help?
The campaign is going just great. Frankly, it's going better than I had anticipated at this very early stage. We are raising money almost exclusively or exclusively from individual small donors, mostly through social media or people who see me on some of the media that you've discussed and then call in. Interestingly enough, my donations, and there's almost 1,200 individual donors at this
This
point.
is your website, by the way.
Yes. My donations are coming from all over the United States, which is a real statement about how people in the U.S. perceive Ms. Pelosi, because it's not that I'm such a wonderful guy, which of course I am, but
your wife, I'm sure, thinks
that's
so.
why.
Yeah?
Because I'm unknown. I'm a stranger to most people. Those donations are coming in from all over the U.S. because
Right.
people like what I'm saying, but more importantly, they're coming in because they don't like the Democratic establishment. And they see my campaign as a vehicle and a way to express their views of dislike over the Democratic establishment.
Right.
My campaign is a local campaign. It's the 12th district of California.
Which includes?
It includes about 90% of San Francisco. There's a
Right.
small corner of it which is in Jackie Spears district.
Okay.
But it is a campaign and a race with national implications.
Right.
And that's because of who Ms. Pelosi is. If I am successful, and I intend to be, unseating Ms. Pelosi, that's going to send a shockwave of a message across the whole United States about the future of the Democratic Party.
Exactly. And so far, you have gotten a lot of endorsements from, would you say that majority of your support are coming from the folks who work on Bernie Sanders' campaign and supported him, which is a huge chunk, by the way?
Well, yes, I was and remain a very strong Bernie supporter.
Right.
People tell me I resemble Bernie. We look a little like each other. We both have
He's older than you.
not much,
Okay.
not much older.
All right.
Yes, and I think I'm getting a lot of support from Bernie-crats, progressive
Right.
Democrats. The Democratic Party is really two parties right now. There's the progressive side of it, and then there are what I call the Dinos, D-I-N-Os, Democrats in name only, because they're really, I think, more Republican light is what I call them. People who have corporate interests, take money from corporations, and embrace the values of business and corporations more than I do.
Right, right. Okay, so we're running out of time. How can people help your campaign?
There's two ways they can help. The hardest thing for me to have done in this campaign is to ask people for money. It's very hard for me to do.
And that's where they
But-
go to the website, right?
But I have to say that money is the fuel that runs the campaign right now. And if people agree or like with what I'm saying, and if they are able to give me money, that will be very helpful. That will help get my message out, and it will help unseat Ms. Pelosi.
So this is, oh, how about that, ladies and gentlemen? Here's Mr. Stephen Jaffe, and it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. Please watch Mr. Jaffe, and it's going to be an exciting race. You saw his website. Please help, and I would think that his candidacy would be a challenge for the better for San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and good night.